We are going to start. This is a little bit non-traditional, but I think it is the best proactive way that we can move forward with this. So for all of the house attendees, thank you so much for being here. As you raise your hand, I can't see your nameplate, and some of you, I don't know your names. So I'm just going to, there, that's what we need. You guys are great.
I'll help you any way I can.
I know. Sometimes it's stronger help than others. Um, so we are going to hear from our reviser. She is simply going to go through the contents and slowly. She's going to go through the contents of Senate Bill 532. Now, many of you have been with us in the journey as far as what we have tried to do from a legislative standpoint in working with the regents, in working with parents, working with teachers, working with the Department of Education to improve literacy for the kids in our schools. We unfortunately haven't found a way to really, in a cohesive manner, found the path for that. This is referred to as a blueprint, the Kansas Blueprint for Literacy. We feel, at least for our state, it would be some landmark legislation because we haven't really had a formal blueprint on how to move forward with regard to helping kids that have cognitive reading issues, how to help teachers get the training that they didn't receive when they went through the colleges or universities. We are going to have some questions today that, quite honestly, I will be the first to say, and I'll jump in for our reviser because it's not up to her to decide. Likewise, as chairman of Senate Ed, it's not for me to decide, but you will hear this reminder, it's a blueprint. A blueprint provides just an idea of what something is going to be once it's built. It's not what kind of carpet we're going to have. It's not the color of the paint. It's not the cabinets. We're not deciding any of that yet. But what you will find is there are multiple layers of this. So it's at least a 3-story plan. It's a 3-story blueprint, if you will. So some of the answers to questions you might have haven't been decided yet and aren't appropriate to be legislated because we aren't the experts. But I hope that you will see as you look at this that there will be many different groups represented, voices, an opportunity to be heard, to literally be at the table that are the experts. And we need that expertise to come together. If as a state, it's not going to matter which district you teach in, what district your child attends, but that we will collectively as a state be working to move forward to assure that literacy opportunities and the focus on literacy is viewed as the true foundation for all kids when they're in kindergarten, first, second, third grade. The data is out there. The data is out there. Throughout the United States, 9 out of 10 individuals that are incarcerated are illiterate. There's a connection. Graduation from high school or dropping out from high school, behavior issues in elementary, middle, and high school, all are found to be tethered to literacy or the lack of literacy. Suicide is often tethered to the literacy issue. So we are going to listen to just an overview of this bill. We're going to go around, the table, ask questions. So as we kind of move through, once we get through section 1, we're going to pause. Are there questions about that? So we're going to move through it. And then my hope is we'll still have some time If there are individuals that represent different groups in the audience, if they have questions, they will share as well. I am going to ask, or at least afford the opportunity for Dr. Cynthia Lane. She's on the Kansas Board of Regents, an opportunity to come forward as well. She has been working on this, as have the Board of Regents. They've worked on this for several of their different monthly meetings, and she'll give some insight on that as well. So I do thank your willingness to join as a committee, particularly thank my co-chair from the House for the willingness to have us come together so that we don't take up valuable time to just have all kinds of different days where we're going through the same thing. I thought it was better that we could all hear the questions and the answers together. So at this time, I will call on our reviser, Tamara Lawrence. She is the reviser for Senate Education, and she is the individual that helped actually find the right words for what we have before us. Thank you so much for being here, Tamara.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committees. As Chair Baumgartner said, I'm Tamara Lawrence, and I am the reviser for the Senate Education Committee. You should have access to a reviser memorandum that goes through the details of the blueprint for literacy, and hopefully you also have a copy of Senate Bill 532 in front of you. The blueprint for literacy would establish requirements, goals, recommendations, and reports for the State Board of Regents, the State Board of Education, and the state's post-secondary educational institutions with regard to literacy education for Kansas students and literacy training for current and pre-service teachers in the state. Section 1 of the Blueprint for Literacy begins on page 1 in line 27 and provides the citation for the entire act, which is the Kansas Blueprint for Literacy, and also provides definitions for relevant terms that are used throughout the act. And that is section 1 of the bill.
Are there? Do you have any questions about what it means to be an in-service individual? Any questions about section 1? Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a point of information, I'm only finding this information on the Senate site, and I want to make sure that that is the accurate place for it. I can't.
It is.
Okay.
It is, because that was submitted for us. But so you don't have a House bill number yet, is my understanding.
No, we don't. I'm just trying to find the information that for this meeting, and so
Okay. So
just want to make sure it's fine. Thank you.
Are you able to find it on the Senate side?
Yes, I am now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So again, when we talk about pre-service, that is someone that is studying to be a teacher.
And I will just note, if there is a House bill that comes that mirrors this bill, I will make sure this information is also attached to the House bill as well. Moving on to section 2 of the Blueprint for Literacy. This section would establish the Literacy Advisory Committee. The committee would be made up of at least 16 members. Some of them would be voting, some of them would be non-voting members. And these members would represent a variety of legislative, literacy, and both K-12 and post-secondary education perspectives. I'm not going to walk through each membership appointment, but you can see those on page 2 of the bill, starting in line 14. And in addition to the required appointments and ex officio memberships, the Director of Literacy Education, which we'll talk about in section 3, would be allowed to appoint non-voting members of the committee as the director deems appropriate. The committee would be responsible for monitoring literacy training of teachers, the best practices for literacy training and literacy education, the attainment of the goal to have 100% of Kansas elementary teacher workforce achieve a micro-credential in the science of reading and structured literacy. They would also make recommendations to the Director of Literacy, the Board of Regents, the State Board of Education, post-secondary educational institutions, and both the House and Senate Committees on Education. They would also be required to submit a plan to the Board of Regents on the establishment of centers of excellence in reading which you can read more about in Section 7 of the bill, and which I will address when we get to Section 7 of the bill. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions on the Literacy Advisory Committee.
So, Representative Estes.
Thank you. I'm looking at page 2, line 30, and I just want clarification. That's one person for each university or one out of the 3?
One that would represent all 3.
And does the bill later explain how they would be chosen?
It does not.
It
Thank
does
you.
not, and it does not prescribe that. If they want to rock, paper, scissors, they can, but to dictate how they're to do it, our belief is that the Board of Regents can guide that.
Thank you.
Other questions, committee? Senator Gossage.
I'm sorry, we were just noticing that Washburn has 1 member, but yet we have KUK State, Wichita State has 1 member. Can you tell me why that is?
Yes, because KU, K-State, and Wichita State, those are the 3 research universities. You'll see that Pittsburgh State, Emporia State, and Fort Hays are also, those 3 have 1 representative, and that's because they are the regional universities. Washburn is different from those as well. They have their own, they have a board. And they are not directly, the oversight of Washburn is not the same as the oversight of those universities. Senator Gossage.
I just want to mention, and then we don't want to belabor this, but Pittsburgh State, if I remember correctly, Emporia State, were formerly called Emporia State Teachers College, Pittsburgh State Teachers College, so they have a background in education. I thought they might have more representation. Thank you.
The key for this is that I think a little bit later on, we have the criteria that if any of the members of the committee, if they miss 3 meetings within a 12-month period, they will be replaced by someone. So there is going to be an obvious means of making sure that there is representation. Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure who to address it to, whether reviser or the chair, but on page 3, line 34, it talks about achieving 85% of Kansas 4th graders achieving level 2 or above on the English language arts assessment by 2033. How was the 85% developed?
We'll address that later.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Schmo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious on the timeline of this. Is that something when we're talking about certification, 100% certification of the teachers involved, does the bill create a timeline or will the committee create a timeline to have that done?
Yeah, so if you look on page 3, starting in line 31, it does say that 100% goal of achieving the micro credential would be done by the year 2030, and the leading to the 85% would be by 2033.
Thank you very much.
Representative Miller. You were just letting me know that Representative Schmo had a question. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Did we have a question? Okay, so let's move on.
And I would like to note for Senator Gossage's question, the Director of Literacy Education also in this section does have the authority to appoint non-voting members to this committee as they deem appropriate. So that is also an option to address some of your concerns as well. Now on section 3 of the bill, this begins in the middle of page 4, and this section has to do with the Director of Literacy Education. This section would require the CEO of the Board of Regents to appoint a Director of Literacy Education who would be tasked with implementing and administering the Blueprint for Literacy, what you have in front of you. This person would be an employee of the Board of Regents, and they would also serve as chairperson of the Literacy Advisory Committee. Additionally, the director would have certain duties and responsibilities. I'm not going to go through each one. You can see those listed on page 4, starting in line 27. And they're also in the memorandum. I will note that those duties do require working with both the State Board of Regents and the State Board of Education and reporting certain information to both the committees that are here in this room today.
Are there questions about the role of the executive director? Okay, we'll go ahead and start with, do both of you have questions? Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. My question is, there currently under the Board of Regents, do we currently have similar roles as this executive director?
I would defer that question to the Board of Regents. But it seems like no, they're shaking their heads. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the assist.
Head nod was no. Other questions? I do want to put in there that it would be the executive director that would be responsible for making sure that progress and initiatives and objectives are occurring. It would be an ongoing reporting process for not only the legislature, but the Board of Regents and the Department of Education. So let's move on to section 4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Section 4 of the bill would require the state's post-secondary educational institutions to designate best practices based on the science of reading through structured literacy as the official Tier 1 literacy methodology and would prohibit the use of any discredited methodologies. Additionally, this section would require the Board of Regents to establish a comprehensive reading and literacy assessment system, and that system would include universal screening measures that include diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments. That assessment system would be available for use by school districts on or before May 1st of 2025, and then school districts would be required to utilize this system beginning in school year 25-26. I'll stand for questions.
Committee, what questions do you have on section 4? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the state board is going to have to establish a new assessment system prior, well, this would just be within less than a year of actually having a director of literacy education.
So the Director of Literacy Education, that appointment would be required on or before July 1 of 2024. And that comprehensive assessment system would have to be available to school districts on or before May 1st of 2025. So months.
Less than 1 year.
Yeah, depending on when that person is appointed. The last day they could appoint them is July 1 of 2024.
Representative Hill.
That's kind of a follow-up on that question. Above there where we talked about achieving 75% level 2 or above on the state assessments, is that referring to is this referring to the same assessment, or is this a separate and different assessment that we're talking about?
Thank you. So the assessments that would, the goal to have 85% of Kansas fourth graders achieve level 2, and you can see this on page 3, starting at about line 31, that would be on the English Language Arts state assessment. So that would be the state assessment that those kids are given every year. This assessment would be an assessment system, and it would be different.
Explain what an assessment system is to me, I guess.
Yeah, so this requires the diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments. So you would evaluate kids before you sort of start a unit on literacy, while the unit is happening, and then at the end. So you can kind of see what you're starting with, how they're doing, and if you need to change anything, and then where you ended up.
Is this a description of the teaching method that's currently being employed with the letters, or is this something, a new assessment that we wouldn't be?
So I believe the letters thing that is for the teachers, to learn how to instruct students in literacy. And these assessments that we're talking about here would be given to the children to kind of see where they're at.
Thank you.
And we'll save that question. I think that Dr. Lane can help with that when she gets up. Who else do we have? Senator Petty.
So, kind of along the same lines as what I asked earlier and what has just been asked. So, so here we have the state board making recommendations on an assessment tool, but it's unclear to me whether that is a recommendation that's coming from this literacy advisory committee.
Yes, so this section is requiring the State Board of Regents in collaboration with post-secondary educational institutions and research experts to establish that assessment system. And then they would make recommendations to the State Board of Education on that assessment system.
And this is, Madam Chair, sorry. Again, this is making a recommendation for an assessment from a advisory committee that would just have been appointed less than a year before.
That is correct. Chair Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So question, does this bill grant the Kansas Board of Regents Director of Literacy the authority or approval over teacher education curriculum in these nonprofit colleges?
I don't believe so, no.
It does not.
Madam Chair.
Representative Estes.
I'm looking at page 3, line 19, and it deals with how meetings are called by the chair, but it doesn't designate how much time be provided or how the call is issued. Is that addressed anywhere else, or the bill is silent on that?
No, the bill is silent. It literally just says that the committee may meet at any time and at any place within the state upon the call of the chairperson, who is the Director of Literacy Education.
Thank you.
One thing that I noticed was absent. It doesn't make reference to coma. And so I think that that might be something that in the future, as we're working the bill, just so everyone knows, I feel like the work of this must be public and people need to know when meetings are scheduled. So following coma, I think would be important. Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On, let's see, page 5, line 30. 38, about the Board of Regents will support the elementary and secondary schools as necessary to eliminate any discredited methodologies. Is there a place in here somewhere where they would also provide support for those teachers that are credentialed through this new system, that they're implementing the process correctly?
Yeah, so in a little while, we'll sort of talk about the credentialing system that would go into place. And we'd also, there is a section in here that discusses tracking the progress of that credentialing as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any additional questions before we move to the next section? Okay, let's move on.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to section 5, which begins on page 6 in line 10 of the bill. And this section would require the State Board of Regents and the State Board of Education to collaborate to jointly approve a micro-credential or certification requirements for teachers in the science of reading and structured literacy. Professional development programs and micro-credential courses would be provided at low or no cost to teachers. The Board of Education and the Board of Regents would also provide data to the Director of Literacy to track teacher training and credentialing. And I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Committee, are there questions about the micro-credentialing? Representative Featherston, did you have your hand up? Okay, sorry, I thought it was. Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really have a question, but it might be helpful if the reviser could describe micro-credentialing versus regular credentialing, just to refresh our memories.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. So a micro-credential is basically a short credential that's very focused that a person earns by showing competency and knowledge in a very targeted area. In this case, the science of reading and structured literacy.
Other questions? Seeing none, let's move on to the next section.
Section 6 of the Blueprint for Literacy starts on page 6, beginning in line 33. And this section provides the requirements for post-secondary educational institutions. It states that the president or chancellor, provost, and dean of the schools of education would jointly have oversight and supervision of reading and literacy courses at their respective institutions. And they would also be required to ensure that courses in science of reading and structured literacy are provided in all early childhood and elementary teacher preparation programs. They would also be required to conduct a system-wide analysis of the curriculum maps across all literacy courses and report on any results to the Literacy Advisory Committee, in addition to the other requirements that the institutions would be required to do. And you can see those at the bottom of page 6. And I'll be happy to answer questions.
Committee, are there questions? We'll have a quiz at the end on curriculum mapping. So let's move on to section 7.
Section 7 starts on page 7 there in the middle, about line 18. And this would require the Literacy Advisory Committee to develop a plan to establish 6 regional centers of excellence in reading. And it also provides the requirements for those centers. And that would include providing evaluation and identification of reading difficulties and reading disabilities. They would also be required to collaborate with school districts to develop strategic literacy plans for individual students, collaborate with the State Department of Education, the State Board of Regents, and those post-secondary educational institutions to support both pre-service and in-service teacher training. In addition to that, they would also support professional development, and they would also pilot structured reading applied learning simulation laboratories for pre-service and in-service teachers. And the plan would also have to identify projected costs, staffing, and budget impacts to develop and expand and sustain the centers of reading excellence. And they would also be required to make recommendations and provide progress reports to the Literacy Advisory Committee. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, are there questions about the service centers? Representative Schreiber and then Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was on the in line 23 about the collaboration of the universities with community-based literacy organizations. I'm not sure exactly what that would be. Is that kind of a co-teaching, or is it something where they might be able to share resources or something like that?
Yeah, and I believe one example of one of those community-based centers would be the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center. It's down in Wichita. So it would be that type of facility that they would collaborate with.
Senator Petty.
So under the section 7, the establishing 6 regional centers of excellence. So then I'm a little unclear. Are those regional centers under the Board of Regents, or are they, or is it potentially there? I can see that they can be on a school, in an existing building or school of a school district, post-secondary educational institution, or community facility. So who are they directly under?
That's a great question, Senator. And that is a question that the Literacy Advisory Committee would address when they're creating the plans to establish these centers.
So did I miss that?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different than how we normally draft, I guess. We normally direct people to do things, and you're going to establish these centers. But in this case, the Literacy Advisory Committee is being directed to establish a plan to come up with how these centers would be established and run.
Thank you.
Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what point, I know a lot of this is getting reported to the advisory council. Is there anything in the bill, and maybe I'm not seeing it, where the council reports directly to the legislature?
Yes, there is a requirement, and I will have to take a minute to look at it. But if you look at I found it at the very bottom of page 3, starting in line 43. They would be required to make recommendation to the House and Senate Standing Committees on Education on the implementation of the goals for the Blueprint for Literacy and any changes necessary to achieve those goals.
Got it. Thank you. Apologize for missing that, Madam Chair.
Vice Chair Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Tamara, for the information. On page 7, starting in line 28, those 8 items there, can you tell me how those are new or different than activities that are currently going on around a collaboration and efforts to improve reading and reading instruction?
I cannot speak to what entities are doing at the moment to address some of these issues. The only thing I'll say is starting in line 28, those things listed there would be included in the plan established by the Literacy Advisory Committee. And I would defer to someone else to answer what's actually happening.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Dr. Lane can help with that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any hands. So the final section. I think it's just
The bill would
will
take effect upon publication in the Kansas Register, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on that.
There we go. Thank you so much. Dr. Lane, could you please come forward? I think you're going to give us a little bit of background, but I think you also heard there were some questions. I know I've heard questions to clarify. No one here specifically asked the question, but I heard one prior to the meeting about Tier 1. How did we get to the 85% for Level 2 assessments, nonprofit colleges and universities? And then the question with regard to how is this different from what's already being done?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chair Thomas, and to the committee for being here today. It is really a privilege for me to represent the Kansas Board of Regents on this particular initiative. We have been highly focused, as you know, on our Building a Future strategic plan, and it has 3 pillars: helping Kansas families, supporting Kansas business, and driving economic prosperity across our state. And we find that there is no more important work than literacy to ensure families, businesses, and our whole state can move forward. So we are fully embracing this work and excited about the potential of having the Board of Regents have an active role rather than a passive role in ensuring strong workforce development for our educators. Our teachers across the state, many of you who know me know I've been involved in our education for several decades. Our teachers are remarkable, and giving them the right tools, we will see all of our students flourish. So I wanted to give you a little background about how KBOR in particular arrived at this place. 2 years ago, the Board of Education began focusing on educator workforce development and asking ourselves, are we doing all we can do to assist our partners at the State Board of Education, ensure teachers are coming out of the universities fully prepared, and when they are in our classrooms, are we doing all we can to support them? So the board formed a educator workforce task force led by our deans of the colleges of education, and including Washburn, and asked them to bring us back rigorous recommendations on what we can do to improve our work. They did so within 6 months, brought us 18 recommendations, of which the science of reading and structured literacy was one. And they highly recommended that we have a strong focus on ensuring that each of our programs are aligned to the science of reading, are ensuring that our pre-service candidates have explicit knowledge about structured literacy, and when they walk out the door and into a school district in the state of Kansas, superintendents and board members would know that these new teachers are highly skilled and have credentials. So in my past experience as a superintendent, I can tell you that we spent, I'll say, millions of dollars every year in professional learning, helping our teachers in the area of literacy. It's very complex. And so the Board of Regents are standing in front of you today saying, we want to do more and we want to commit to moving things forward. We've been very deliberate in our actions, and we highly endorse Senate Bill 532. So we see this as a unique opportunity. As I was driving over today, I thought this is kind of like our Tour de France. If you are familiar with the tour, they have a team of bicyclists who are the best in the world. And at each segment of that trip, they decide who should take the lead. So in some cases, for teacher development and workforce training, it should be the regents. We should be taking a major lead in developing our pre-service teachers. And then at some point, we're going to hand that work off in collaboration with the state board, who take the lead on doing things like licensure and accrediting our programs. And then there's legislative body. At some point, we need to hand the lead to you all to allocate resources so that we're moving forward together. So I'd be glad to answer questions that you have. It's been a real privilege to work with a team who's been thinking about literacy and developing the blueprint and getting input. We know this bill is not perfect. We look to you to make it stronger so that we can ensure that our teachers and our students have the tools that they need to be successful. So Senator Baumgartner, if you'll remind me of the
Start with Tier 1.
Tier 1. Tier 1 is the instruction that happens in every general education classroom in a school district, and a Tier 1 is the instruction that all teacher candidates would receive in their university training. So it's what we call the general ed. It's the approach. Tier 1 means that it's for everyone. When in training of teachers, there will be some specialized teachers like ESL and special ed. They would be Tier 2 and Tier 3 teachers. They would get additional strategies on top of that. So Tier 1 is what happens in the general classroom across the board.
Okay, now talk to us about the 85% of level 2 on the state assessment.
You know, I really appreciated that question because there is not a hard science around that number, 85%. The team working on the blueprint decided 85% would most accurately reflect the percentage of typically developing individuals in our state. There's about 85% of us that are typically developing that should be able to reach a level 2 or higher on the state assessment. We have another group of students who may need a different curriculum and a different approach that would be in that 15%. Ideally, I'd like to be able to stand in front of you and say it should be 100%, but we think 85% is the realistic and right target.
So now talk a little bit about the assessments. So the assessments that need to be created, at least in this bill, it says that the universities will come up with the different assessments for formative, et cetera.
Thank you for that question. And thank you, Senator Petty, I was just smiling when you were asking about that timeline because, you know, I believe in moving quickly, and I think our team does too. But these assessments are specific tools for our educators to use with our children. And they're assessments that the state board already recommends. They're available nationally. So we are not talking specifically about developing new tools, but identifying the best tools that are in place on the market and ensuring all classroom teachers have access to those. So it won't be starting from scratch, developing brand new would be my anticipation, but it would be identifying the best tools to diagnose that can inform a teacher's instruction and to use so families know if their student is making progress. On the university side, we would be teaching educators how to use those tools. And then we would be working with the state board and recommending to them those tools that should be available across Kansas.
Okay, so now talk to us a little bit. There was a question about who would hold the nonprofit universities accountable. Now there is one member appointed by the Kansas Independent Colleges that would represent the not-for-profits. So could you talk a little bit about how you see that accountability occurring with the committee?
The committee plays a pivotal role and ties to Senator Erickson's question too about what is different about this plan. Having a group of individuals who have a highly laser-like focus on literacy in our state, working across many expertise, many agency backgrounds, will allow us to move forward at a very quick pace. Independent colleges are at the table. We welcome them to be fully engaged in this work. It's an invitation to be, and we think that they'll come along with us.
Committee, what other questions do we have for Dr. Lane? Senator Sykes and then Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Lane, for being here and for everyone who collaborated to bring this together. My question, I know it does talk a little bit about that early childhood factor with ensuring that courses in the science of reading are, but how else would early childhood maybe kind of factor into this blueprint?
We were thinking about how teachers are licensed, and many teachers are licensed in early childhood through grade 3. And so we want them to have that strong background. As an early educator, you're primarily going to be working on phonemic awareness and vocabulary development and those kinds of things. So there'll be a need to understand the big picture, comprehension, of course, but the focus would be a little bit different for a teacher who is only early childhood, but we are preparing them so they could step into a first grade class or a second grade class, a third grade class as well.
Thank you for that. I just think it's very important because I know kind of those first years are so important and wanting to make sure that there is a piece of this addressing that as well.
It's critical.
Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we say level 2, I know that means different things. Does level 2 mean second grade level, or what does level 2 mean?
Level 2 on the state assessment, it means that they are on grade level. So how the state board has articulated the levels, 1 is below, and they're here, and they could probably better address this than I, but below, but a level 2 on our state assessment means you're at grade level. So we want them at level 2 or above.
And another question, if I may, Madam Chair, is language arts, when it refers to or above on the English language arts state assessment, that typically includes reading, writing, and grammar. But we're talking about literacy, but we're looking at that total picture then.
Right. Literacy is not just the art of learning to call words. It is all of that, learning to read, write, speak, and think. And so this focus in structured literacy and the science of reading brings all that together.
My final question is a concern about the assessment, because usually what we try to have is a test retest. And if you have a child that they scored, or you could compare the class of children the last 3 years with the state assessment. So I'm trying to understand the difference between the state assessment and the assessment that we're asking to be created.
The assessment in this plan references tools that teachers use every day working with students. So a diagnostic assessment would allow a teacher to discover where that child is and what skills they need specific work on to enhance. A formative assessment then allows the teacher to see, is there progress? It informs the family and the teacher and the student what progress that they've made and where are the continued areas to focus. And then, of course, the summative would be that more comprehensive look. Can a child put it all together? So those tools are very separate from the Kansas assessment. But since that is the tool that we use to measure progress and success globally, we felt it important to reflect that here.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Schreiber and then Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Lane. I'd like to kind of concentrate on the support and collaboration pieces in the bill. But first, was this kind of modeled after the Mississippi law?
There were some things that we think Mississippi has done really well that we need to learn from, and things that we think we can do better.
One of those things were what they call literacy coaches, which are embedded in the classrooms and so forth. Is that something that I know you didn't specify it within the bill, but is that something envisioned down the road?
I think we, those of us that were involved in this work, and we had a chance to talk to the leadership at the state board and with the commissioner, would strongly encourage an approach where we ensured every school had an instructional coach. Those centers on excellence in reading, part of their obligation will be to train and work in collaboration with school districts to provide training to instructional coaches, reading coaches, or whatever their main resource is to help move practices forward. But if I could say the number one thing, in my opinion, that Mississippi did best was that very thing, ensured instructional coaches on the ground working with teachers.
Yeah, that's, I've heard the same thing. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Haskins and then Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the testimony. And just a couple questions, if I may. On the development of the blueprint, what role did independent colleges play in the developing it? And at the same time, Washburn University, was there a reflection of everybody?
The independent colleges were not engaged in the development of this plan. The state universities and Washburn were. The deans of our state universities in Washburn meet regularly, and they have been influencing this work for that 2-year period.
Okay. Thank you very much. My other question, Madam Chair, if I may, is in reference to the fiscal note. Are you able to answer any questions related to that?
I can give you approximations. How's that? Because I know that's
I'll take your approximations. Those would be great. I'm looking on page 3, and it just says for fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2026, there'll be about 3,000 participants, and they will get $500 each to take I'm assuming, the micro-credential or the assessment. Is that, am I reading that right?
Right. We're estimating, the state board and the State Department of Education is doing a wonderful job with their letters training. They've trained 6,000. They're planning to train 6,000 more. So we were looking at trying to build on that capacity. So we're estimating 3,000.
So this will be new funding, not coming from any other source?
That's correct.
And then my last question, are they receiving graduate credit for this? And if so, is this limited to particular schools or?
I'm smiling because that's something that this committee needs to recommend to the Board of Regents about graduate credit. And I would certainly encourage us looking at that for the letters training, which is very comprehensive. And so they will receive credit towards their degree in their undergraduate program, but we have yet to go the next step with credit at graduate level. But certainly that's something we can consider.
So with that, all of this in that paragraph, that would be as like a hypothetical. This is what the committee it's not part of the blueprint, or is it?
All of that is part of the blueprint.
Okay, thank you very much.
Representative Estes and then Senator Straub. Oh, sorry.
I was a little curious. Kansas has a definition that we use with the federal government defining proficiency, and then we often have a debate about what proficient means with the standardized tests. Did you guys consider using the federal definition? And then I have a follow-up question, if I may, Madam Chair.
You may.
Thank you for that question. We considered putting the NAEP assessment in here as a target, determined not to because it is a random sampling of our students, not all students. In terms of the standards on the state assessment, I would defer to the experts who are here in the room, but we did take a look at where are Kansas standards as in comparison to those on that national assessment. And frankly, Kansas standards are high. So we have great confidence that students that are scoring at 2 grade level or would be very successful on that national assessment as well.
So my concern about that is when you look at the State Department of Education's longitudinal studies, and they describe each of the levels. A level 3 is considered effective. In other words, you've got the information, you can use it, you understand grammar well enough to write a good sentence. And a level 2 is basic. So I think of that as less than effective. You're probably approaching effective, but you're not quite there. And so it gives me a little bit of heartburn to count that as proficient.
You're bringing up a topic that is debated every day in the education circles about how we define these categories. I think that's worth more discussion. But a level 2 is on grade level performance. And that's very strong. If you're on grade level, you're highly literate. You're right, as you approach a 3, that you're approaching college ready and even beyond. But we're confident that students at a level 2 and above will be highly literate individuals, can read, write, think, and speak.
I will agree to disagree. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but I skipped Senator Dietrich and then Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for being here. I love this focus on literacy. You know, we've been talking about this for several years. And so I think putting this kind of a, just a bullseye on structured literacy and the science of reading is exactly what we need to do. It's a pretty aggressive timeline. We're all impatient. Do you think logistically, since there are things that we need to do within this next 12 months, that this can be accomplished?
Absolutely. I think it can be accomplished with all of us at the table, all parties, all stakeholders moving forward, creating a plan and holding each other accountable. It is rigorous, but it is critically important to families, businesses, and our economy. And I have all the confidence that we can do the work. We can do it.
Thank you. I agree. Thank
Senator Straub and then Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Lane, for being here. It looks like the Board of Regents will be appointing that Director of Literacy. And would that individual have to be a certified teacher or any type of education background? Or could that be an individual who maybe excels at literacy, like the person who created Hooked on Phonics? I think it was just a man whose child was having trouble learning how to read, and he had a background in music.
That's a great question. And that question I will defer to the CEO and president of KBOR, who will be making that decision. But the encouragement of, did I walk around that good enough? The encouragement will have two things. This person needs to be a leader that can convene people, can get people working together and organizing and creating these big goals and plans to get there. At the same time, have enough background knowledge and literacy that they understand broadly what experts they need at the table in order to really move. So a combination of strong demonstrated leadership skills and strong knowledge in a general way in literacy. And I say general because the literacy experts need to be on that team. And this person needs to help guide us forward.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is actually a question that Senator Gossage and I both had, was what is the current level of, or current percentage of fourth graders achieving level 2 or greater?
That is not in my purview to know that. I would defer to the State Department for that.
So we just phoned a friend. So we need the friend to give the answer. And while you're looking that up, let's go on to, if you don't mind, we're going to go on to Representative Hill's question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around all this assessment stuff in here. And thank you for your presentation and dedication to the science of reading. I think we're all in agreement that we're headed in the right direction there. This section 4 assessment is kind of problematic for me. And I'm trying to understand exactly what we're trying to get out of this assessment, because we constantly hear about the amount of time that in classrooms that is taken for assessments. And as we've been presenting and talking here, we have talked about NAEP, and we've talked about how the state assessments the state standards are actually higher than NAEP standards, and we use the state assessments to look at whether we're making progress in English language arts. But then there's this section in here that's all put together by the institutions. And I don't even see that there's any collaboration with the Department of Education on that. So exactly what is the purpose of the Section 4 assessment, and what information does it provide us that we're currently not being provided by the state assessments?
Let me address your second point first, the collaboration. This has to be done in collaboration with the state board. And I think one of the things we can do to strengthen the bill is make it very clear that this is in collaboration with, not in isolation from the state board and KSDE. We have to together determine the assessments and do this work. So I'd have you think about those assessments as, I was thinking tools that you'd use in a kitchen to cook. I mean, these are for the teacher. They're not for accountability purposes. These are for the teacher, the student, and the family. The diagnostic piece would be, where is the child today in phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension of vocabulary? How are they doing in that area? And then the teacher uses that information, diagnostic information, to create a menu, a plan, a recipe, if you will, for that child. They implement that, and then they do a formative assessment to say, did we make progress? So these are tools a teacher would use on a daily, weekly basis in their classroom as they are helping young people strengthen their literacy skills. And then the summative would be in a specific to reading, specific to that child's plan, an overview summation of what progress did we make in a given period of time. So these are very different from the Kansas assessment. They're very explicit in those 5 areas of literacy, and they are for teachers. Teacher tools, families, teachers, students.
Yeah, follow up.
Quick one.
Quick. So reporting on that then, I mean, those summations, where are they going to be reported to?
Those are classroom teacher tools. They are used by the teacher with the family, with the student.
Okay, thank you.
Then we're hypothesizing, and I use that word on purpose, that translates to the Kansas assessment and students' performance there that we all then, in an aggregate way, can examine.
Thank you, that helps.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Lane. Real quickly, you mentioned accountability, and that's a word we use a lot. So my question is, what happens if we don't hit these benchmarks? What happens if someone isn't a good faith player? The fiscal note for FY 2025 is over $18 million. So the true question is, what happens if it doesn't make a difference or it doesn't accomplish what the plan says it's going to?
Well, I have great faith that that advisory committee, with the right people around the table, the experts in literacy, and working in strong collaboration with this body and with the state board, that we can move the needle forward, that we can hit these targets. And we need to be monitoring that along the way. Leading indicators will be monitored regularly by that committee. How are we doing? What adjustments do we need to make so we can be sure that those lag indicators, these big goals, are actually successful? So it's a continuous improvement model.
I appreciate that, but we've had a continuous improvement model in our school systems ever since I started my career, for sure. And what we've seen is achievement decline. So the true accountability question is, what happens if we don't? I know we all hope it does. I hope for our Kansas kids it does. There's nothing more important than reading, but the accountability is what happens if it doesn't.
You know, I appreciate that. We do recognize, and hence why this blueprint exists, that we need to do better in terms of producing highly literate citizens. This is the first time that I have known in that we've all coming together. We all have a role. We all have a plan. We all have support, and we will be moving this together. So I think it will be successful. The accountability will come through that committee and your appointments to that committee, and the ability of the regents and the state board to continue to work closely together. We have a great working relationship to be sure that things are moving in the direction we have, and frankly, that our teachers have the tools they need to do their work.
We have clarification on where we are right now on level 2. I need you to go to the microphone and identify yourself.
Ann Moss, State Board of Education. 4th grade, overall, level 2 and above, 81% right now, and all grades, 67%.
I think what we're probably going to be seeing is some serious look at that percentage and the level as we move forward with the work on this bill. Committee, I am not seeing any additional hands. We were supposed to be on the floor 3 minutes ago. I do appreciate your participation and those that are here in the audience as well. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
And singing happy birthday to our Madam Chair. Happy birthday. Education Committee. Can you hear me? Not very loud. All right, House Education Committee, we're going to take a quick minute. You saw the minutes that were emailed out to you. I just want to make sure everybody saw that. I believe we have an amendment to the minutes from Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like you to look at the minutes on Monday, February 5th. Monday, February 5th. And so in the first line, actually the second line, just a clarification, deals with voluntary school chaplain, could be just chaplains, but take fees out, please. Yeah. And you could plural chaplains.
Pulling them up right now. Hold on. Okay, so take out the word fees. And then what was the other part?
Make it chaplains.
Make it chaplains instead of chaplain. All right. So the motion is to take out the word fees on the minutes for February 5th, and then change the word chaplain to chaplains on the minute notes. And I have a second from the vice chair. Good. All right. Those in favor of the amendment to the minutes, say aye. Those opposed? Very good. With that, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from Representative Hill, seconded by Representative Getz. Those in favor of approving the minutes as amended, say aye. Those opposed? Very good. We will see you all Wednesday in our normal room. And with that, the House side is adjourned.